We all have fears. There's something we're all afraid of. But when your partner is depressed, there's one big fear, one that is heavier and more intense than probably anything else you've ever feared in your life. And that is the fear of your partner killing themselves, of committing suicide. I'm Rachel Sloan. I'm a relationship coach and a certified NLP practitioner, and this is the Journey to Emotional Freedom. And today we are going to tackle this heavy, hard topic because it is something that needs to be talked about. I'd like to share a little bit of my story because I think it highlights how common this fear is and how important it is to address it. So when I was young, when I was in late elementary school, early middle school, someone very dear to me and my family suffered from depression. And I remember in this kind of childish way where I wasn't really aware of even what depression was, but I knew what suicide was. And I was afraid that I would come home one day and he wouldn't be there. I remember feeling like this trepidation walking up my front steps sometimes, like just wondering, what if today's the day? And it was like this foreboding feeling that I had, this like kind of underlying nervousness and despair that what if? What then? And then as an adult, when my husband started suffering from depression, those old fears came right back. I was like, well, wow, what if? What if he kills himself? And I'm very lucky because he talks to me about his depression a lot. But that also means he talks to me about suicide. He talks to me about killing himself. And that is perhaps one of the hardest things to hear, and it is one of the hardest places to hold space for your partner and to listen with compassion. Because I know for me, I hear those words and I get this like rising panic that starts in my stomach and up my chest into my head, and it is terrifying. So something that I noticed both as a child and again now as an adult is that when I am experiencing this fear, when I am thinking, what if he kills himself? And I am feeling that fear, the response that I get emotionally is grief. And I think this is super interesting and really relevant because when I feel that grief, it's as though it has already happened. I experience an intense grief. Like if I let it go, it becomes this like sobbing, intense, panicky grief. It's as though he had already died. It is as though he has already committed suicide. When I think these thoughts, when I engage with this fear, I am creating that experience. It has not happened, but I am grieving as though it had. I'm creating that emotional experience for myself with my thoughts. The fear is that powerful. If this is something that you are afraid of, if you have fears about your partner committing suicide, I strongly encourage you to take a few minutes and do this exercise with me. I'm about to walk you through a process that will help you acknowledge your fear and work with it in a way that will be healing and restorative and allow you to move forward without the burden of that grief or that panic. Are you ready? The first step is to find the underlying fear. What are you actually afraid of? This means asking a question that can be a little hard. When you think, what if my partner kills himself, or my partner might kill himself, and you feel afraid, ask yourself this question. He might kill himself, so what? Why am I so afraid of that? And I know this sounds ridiculous because you're like, obviously it would be horrible if he killed himself, and we can all agree on that. What we're trying to do is figure out what part of that is really causing you this pain. Is it that you're going to miss him terribly? Is it that you're afraid of being left alone? Is it that you might feel guilty because you weren't able to stop him? Is it that you would think you should have done more, you could have said the right thing, you should have seen the signs? What is the real reason that you are so terrified of him committing suicide? Take a moment, ask yourself this question, and be gentle with yourself. You are being so courageous by being willing to go into your brain and explore something that you're afraid of. If you're getting stuck with this, I would encourage you to get a pen and a piece of paper and write the question down. Say, my partner might kill himself. So what? What am I so afraid of? Write it down and just wait. Give yourself a few minutes. See what comes up. Write down the response. The next step is going to sound really strange. It might make you feel like you have multiple personalities or something. I promise you don't. This is super, super normal. I want you to consider that there is a part of yourself, a part of your brain, that has this very specific fear. Whatever you came up with in step 1, that you're afraid of being left alone, that you're afraid there's something you could have done to stop him, that you're afraid you'll have regrets about how you behaved in your life together. Whatever that is, there's a part of you that has this very specific fear. I want you to imagine that you could have a conversation with that part, that you could ask it to stand out in front of you where you can see it in your mind's eye and talk to it. I know this sounds weird, but think of it kind of like your subconscious, right? You treat your subconscious as an other all the time, right? It sends you messages, things pop up from your subconscious. It's a part of you that you don't always have access to. That's how I want you to think of this part of you that's afraid. So bear with me. I really think you're going to like the results you get from this conversation. We're just going to explore, like we might with your subconscious, and see what information and what tools we can get from this part of you. So here's the exercise. I want you to ask this fearful part with this very specific fear to step out where you can see it in your mind's eye. Imagine it in front of you. You can close your eyes if you want. Does it have a shape? How big is it? Is it light or dark? Is it heavy? Is it soft? Is it firm? Really just notice, what does that part of you look like? This fearful part. And this is the weirdest thing I'm going to ask you to do. I want you to thank that part of you for being there and for working with you. I know, I told you it's weird. Please just do it. It will help. Okay. Now that you've thanked that part, we are going to ask it a couple of questions. First, what does that fearful part want for you? I want you just to ask the question and wait for the answer. It might want you to be safe. It might want you to be loved. It might want you to not end up alone. It's probably trying to protect you from something bad that it thinks could happen. Ask it what it wants for you. What positive thing does it want for you? The next step is to ask this part of you to notice what happens when you are fearful, when you have this specific fear of being alone, of not having done enough, whatever it is. When you have that fear, what happens? Do you, like me, end up experiencing the effects as though that fear were already true? Do you feel grief? Do you feel shame? Do you feel lonely? I want you to ask this part of you to acknowledge that when this fear comes up, it creates the experience of that fear having already come true. Just to ask that part of you to notice that that's what happens. Once you and this fearful part of you have acknowledged what happens when you're living in that fear, that you're experiencing the emotional effect as though that fear were already true, the next step is to ask this fearful part of you if it's willing to look for another way. Since that fear is not serving you, is it willing to consider a different way of thinking that would be more resourceful for you, more useful for you? Your current way of thinking is producing grief. It's producing loneliness. It's producing shame. Is this part willing to consider thinking a different way? If you get a positive answer, I want you to thank it and ask it to help you brainstorm. How else could I think and feel about the possibility of my partner killing himself? How could I think and feel differently in a way that won't produce grief or shame or loneliness? And once you brainstorm some new thoughts, the final step in the real work is to practice those new thoughts and practice them religiously. Say them to yourself 100 times a day, and whenever the thought does come up about your partner killing himself, when you do have that fear, practice that new thought. I hope this is helpful. It's so important not to ignore these fears. It's also important not to fully indulge in them, because going down that path, indulging in that fear, just produces the very emotions you're afraid of experiencing in the future. You are creating the experience for yourself as though your partner had already killed himself. This is not useful. This is not helpful to you. How do you want to think and feel instead? Choose the new thoughts, the new feelings, and practice the new thoughts until you start to experience the new feelings. And if you're not sure how to go about choosing a new thought when you think, how do I want to think and feel instead, and you get stuck on that step, I strongly encourage you to go watch the video, Why Positive Affirmations Don't Work. It talks a lot about how to change your thoughts effectively by choosing a neutral thought. Instead of going for a super positive thought that you don't believe, you can choose a neutral thought that feels better than what you're thinking now and is kind of a stepping stone towards where you'd like to be. So if you're hung up on how to choose a new thought to practice, go and watch that video. You'll find it super helpful. Okay, I know that this is a difficult and painful topic, and if you have watched this to the end, you are so courageous and brave for going in and doing this exploration. This is one of the most terrifying things you can explore in your own mind, but the relief that you get if you do that work is so worth it. So thank you for being here. Thank you for trying this. And I say this every time, but I would really love to hear about your experience in the comments below, because this in particular is something I think we need to share. Those of us who love partners with depression, I think sharing these fears, talking about them, and also talking about how we're dealing with them and how we're moving forward with them is so important for the other people who also love people with depression, the other partners who are supporting a spouse or a boyfriend with depression. I think this is so important for them to hear about your experience and about my experience, so that they know that they are not alone with these fears, and that they know there is an effective way to handle them and to feel better. So that's a really long way of asking you to please share in the comments if you feel comfortable doing so. Okay, thank you for sticking with me today, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.